Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the heavy dusk of history and into a world where shadows stretch across palace walls and your footsteps echo against polished stone floors. You're not just visiting, you're stepping into the life of someone almost erased from the grand narrative, a forgotten eunuch. You walk through colossal palace gates carved with dragons or lions, depending on which empire's threshold you've crossed. The guards don't even look at you. Why would they? You're neither fully threatening nor fully ordinary. You're something different, and you probably won't survive this if you imagine it too vividly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far these sleepy journeys travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch against gravel as you trudge beneath gates so tall they block half the moonlight. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing down on you. Massive wooden beams, lacquered black and red, carved with symbols of imperial might. The palace smells faintly of oil lamps and incense, a sweetness that never fully hides the sour undertones of too many people crammed into one complex. You're just another shadow, moving forward into a world where every step is prescribed and every breath might be overheard. In the world of eunuchs, palaces were not merely homes, they were living beasts, sprawling with endless corridors, courtyards, and chambers that seemed to multiply the further you went inside. The Forbidden City in Beijing alone had nearly 9,000 rooms. Imagine being a servant in that labyrinth where even emperors sometimes got lost. You might wonder if the builders designed it that way, to remind everyone, even the ruler himself, that the palace was more eternal than any single person. A mainstream fact to ground you, eunuchs existed in many civilizations, not just China. You could stumble through these palace gates in Byzantium, the Ottoman Empire, or ancient Mesopotamia, and still be recognized instantly for your role, always close to power, always slightly outside of normal society. Your path crunches forward past two colossal bronze lions. They glint in the moonlight, their jaws frozen mid-snarl. If you squint, they look like they're judging you. A little harsh maybe, but lions don't mess around with half measures. You step into a courtyard where shadows of pine trees stretch like crooked fingers. Somewhere inside the chambers, an emperor is snoring, or maybe plotting. Either way, he won't do it alone. He'll need people like you to fetch scrolls, deliver whispered messages, and quietly stand in corners unseen but indispensable. A quirky tidbit here, some palaces trained eunuchs to walk without making sound. Entire schools of shuffling existed like secret Hogwarts houses but for tiptoeing. It was a skill considered as important as reading or calligraphy. Imagine your boss praising you not for closing a deal, but for your ability to ghost through hallways. Congrats, Johnson, your footsteps were nearly inaudible today. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were deliberately designed as invisible tools, stripped of family ties to ensure loyalty, or whether they carved out their own importance by necessity, seizing whatever scraps of power and recognition they could find. Either way, as you pass through those gates, you feel it, the strange paradox of being at once less than human and yet vital to the machinery of empire. The air grows heavier the deeper you go. Musky tapestries drape from the walls, their once vivid colors faded by candle smoke. You notice the sounds here aren't random, they're controlled, orchestrated. Bells chime faintly from a distant watchtower, a rhythm that dictates when you move, when you kneel, when you speak. It's almost hypnotic, and you realize that palace life is built less on spontaneity and more on ritual repetition, like a lullaby on loop. But don't relax too much. Palaces like this have teeth. Behind these elegant corridors lie dungeons, and not the cool medieval fantasy kind. Some eunuchs were sent there for whispering the wrong thing, or just being in the wrong hallway at the wrong time. So every step through these gates is both a privilege and a gamble. One of your fellow eunuchs sidles past you, head bowed, carrying a tray of glowing lanterns. His pace is steady, like he's balancing eggs on chopsticks. You wonder how many years he's been doing this, how many decades he's been pacing these same marble stones. The truth? Probably since boyhood. Eunuchs were often taken young, some not even in their teens, molded into palace furniture before they understood what they'd lost. There's a bitter irony here. You stand at the center of the world's most powerful empire, yet you're an outsider in every sense. Citizens outside the gates laugh, love, and raise families. You, on the other hand, belong to the palace itself. You're neither noble nor commoner. You're a hinge, a lock, a silent key in someone else's kingdom. But tonight, you glide through those gates and you realize something chilling. This palace is going to be your entire world, your cradle, your stage, and one day, your coffin. The gates don't just keep outsiders away, they keep you in. And so, as the moon arcs high above the courtyard, and the lions stare with unblinking bronze eyes, you cross the final threshold. The gates close behind you with a hollow thud that seems to echo forever, sealing your fate as one of the forgotten, one of the altered, one of the unseen architects of history. You've crossed those looming palace gates, and now the truth sharpens like a blade. Your entire life here hinges on an operation, the dreaded moment every eunuch shares, though few ever talk about it out loud. You walk in the quiet dusk, but your body remembers that day, how you were laid out on a mat, the air thick with pungent herbs meant to numb the senses, though, let's be honest, they didn't numb much. The procedure itself was as brutal as it was final. A knife heated in coals, a quick cut if the surgeon was skilled, a slow, fumbling mess if he wasn't. In China, the entire package was often removed and stored in a jar called a bao, kept as proof. That way, if you misbehaved later, they could dangle it as blackmail or hand it back at your burial so you weren't considered incomplete in the afterlife. Morbid, right? You probably won't survive picturing that too vividly either. What you do survive is the transformation itself. Suddenly you're not quite boy, not quite man. Your voice lingers somewhere in between, neither rising nor falling in the expected way. Your face smooths over, losing some of its ruggedness. You start to look a little timeless, as if history hasn't fully decided what category you belong in. A mainstream fact here: in the Ottoman Empire, black eunuchs, brought from regions in East Africa, became some of the most powerful figures in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. They controlled access to the harem, essentially deciding who could see the sultan's wives and concubines. That's power through a doorway, and it all started with the same dreaded knife. As you shuffle through memories of the operation, the smell of those old herbal remedies comes back. They used wine, vinegar, or even cold river water to try to stop the bleeding. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Mortality rates could be terrifyingly high. One mistake and you bled out on the DI. Historians still argue whether families who offered their sons knew the risks, or if the promise of palace glory blinded them to it. Quirky tidbit time. In some regions, eunuchs were thought to be lucky charms, not the marshmallow cereal kind, more like, stand next to this altered guy and maybe your crops won't fail. Some were even hired at temples as living talismans. Picture it, you survive the operation, limp for weeks, and then someone pats you on the shoulder saying, "Congrats, you're a fertility mascot now." You'd roll your eyes if you had the energy. Your first steps after the operation feel like walking on shattered glass. You shuffle slowly, clutching your robe tighter than ever, every movement reminding you of what's missing. The palace physicians keep a close eye, not out of compassion, but because you're now a royal investment. Lose you to infection, and that's wasted property. Survive, and you're a fresh cog in the palace machine. And here's the cruel irony. You begin to realize that surviving the knife gives you a weird kind of immortality. Your voice doesn't deepen with age, your beard never thickens, your body keeps its softness long after your peers wrinkle and stoop. You're a walking reminder of a suspended adolescence, forever caught between childhood and adulthood. But the operation wasn't just about biology, it was about control. You're no threat to the royal bloodline. No one fears you fathering heirs or sneaking around with concubines. You're safe. And in being safe, you're suddenly trusted with doors others could never open. It's as if the knife cut away not just your manhood, but suspicion itself. Imagine standing at a chamber door, the faint smell of lotus incense floating out from within. The emperor's consort laughs softly on the other side. You knock, and no one panics. It's only you. You're not a lover, you're not a rival, you're a shadow carrying scrolls and secrets. Yet in quiet moments lying on a thin mat at night, your thoughts spiral. You wonder if you were chosen or abandoned, if your family believed in you or simply saw no better option. Historians still argue whether boys were coerced by poverty or if families genuinely believed palace service was a golden ticket. Either way, you were marked, and your body tells the story every time you glance at yourself in water's reflection. The palace gates loom in memory, but the knife looms larger. You walk forward tonight, the scar invisible to others but undeniable to you. It shapes how you stand, how you speak, how you're seen. Every time your sandals scrape marble, it's the sound of fate carved into you with a blade you never asked for. You shuffle deeper into the palace and the air grows close, heavy with oil smoke and old stone. Past the ceremonial courtyards and the echo of grand halls lies a quieter world, the cloistered chambers. This is where you and your fellow eunuchs live, tucked away from the grandeur of gold and dragon thrones. No one tours these rooms, no one writes poems about them, but you know every creak of the wooden floors and every flicker of the lamps that swing above your head. The chambers are small, sometimes no larger than a storage closet, sometimes stacked in long dormitory rows. Mats are thin, pillows thinner, and the sound that fills the nights is not laughter but whispers, little threads of gossip traded like secret coins. You feel the closeness of bodies, all men but not quite men, breathing the same recycled air, clutching their thin blankets. The palace might glitter above you, but down here it feels more like a prison dressed in silk wallpaper. A mainstream fact: in the Ming dynasty, the eunuch population ballooned into the tens of thousands. Records suggest over 70,000 eunuchs lived within the Forbidden City at its peak. That's not a side department, that's a small town pressed into service behind walls. Imagine squeezing that many altered souls into a place that never sleeps, where hierarchy is carved into every meal and every glance. You lie on your mat at night, hearing the scurrying of rats behind the plaster, the drip of water from a cracked roof tile. But the louder sound is the whispering. You lean closer to catch it, talk of promotions, of punishments, of who has fallen out of favor. Eunuchs survive by networking in the dark. You don't gamble with cards, you gamble with rumors. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some palaces issued tiny bells to eunuchs' shoes at night, not to track them but to prevent surprise visits to the harem. Imagine tiptoeing with your every step, pea jingling like a cat toy. Of course, the clever ones stuffed the bells with cotton so they could sneak around silently again. Cats 1, Palace 0. Historians still argue whether the cramped living quarters forged solidarity or fostered paranoia. Did the whispers make eunuchs into brothers, bound together by shared suffering? Or did they sharpen claws, each man looking for a chance to outmaneuver the next? Both might be true. You never really know which whisper is a lifeline and which is bait. Your daily rhythm inside these chambers is relentless. Before dawn, a bell clangs, dragging you from restless sleep. You fold your mat with military precision because even creases are inspected. Breakfast is plain, usually rice gruel or bread, enough to fuel you, but never enough to make you feel full. Then you're herded into ranks, assignments read aloud like lottery numbers. Door guard, messenger, incense tender. If you're unlucky, latrine duty. If you're very unlucky, being volunteered for errands that might not return you alive. And here's where the irony blooms again. Out there, emperors and empresses dine under chandeliers, while you sit on wooden stools under smoky rafters, gnawing cold rice. Yet sometimes, with a few murmured words, your whispers can shape the course of the empire more than a royal feast ever could. It's like watching the game from the bench, but also holding the whistle. You walk the dormitory aisle one evening, lantern in hand. The glow throws strange shadows, long noses, sharp cheekbones, tired eyes. You see brothers who've been here decades, their skin pale from years without sun. Some hum lullabies from villages they barely remember, others polish shoes that will never touch earth beyond the palace walls again. The chamber feels less like a bedroom and more like a hive buzzing with dreams half forgotten. But the chambers are also where you first learn loyalty tests. Someone whispers about a superior's mistake. Do you pass it along or pretend you didn't hear? Another slips you a note to deliver. Do you obey or pocket it to trade later? Every choice is a potential trap, and in these tight rooms, betrayal feels as close as the person sleeping 3 mats away. Yet still you laugh sometimes. Human nature refuses to be fully crushed. A eunuch with a crooked smile entertains others with impressions of the emperor's frown. Another sneaks in roasted chestnuts, smuggled from a courtyard fire. For a few minutes you forget the scars and the silence, and you're just men again. Well, almost. And the lamps, always the lamps. Flickering in the corners, smoke rising to stain the beams. They're the only steady companions, glowing weakly even when whispers fade to sleep. You fall asleep staring at that glow, wondering if tomorrow's assignment will lift you closer to the throne or drop you closer to the dungeon. The chambers hold you, mold you, and quietly remind you every night you may serve the emperor, but you live among eunuchs, and only they will ever truly understand the sound of your sigh in the dark. You leave behind the cramped, smoky chambers, but you carry their whispers with you as you step into the polished halls where true power breathes. Out here, the corridors gleam with polished marble, columns rise like petrified giants, and gilded lattice screens shimmer under lantern light. But don't be fooled, it isn't the emperors or kings alone who shape the course of history in these spaces. It's you, and men like you, tethered on a velvet leash of power. At first glance, it seems absurd. How could someone stripped of family, mocked by nobles and confined within palace walls, wield influence over entire empires? And yet, you do, because you're trusted where others cannot be. You can cross thresholds barred to ministers. You can stand in the shadows of royal chambers without raising suspicion. You can carry secrets without fear of divided loyalties. It's almost like fate carved you into the perfect tool, useful, unthreatening, indispensable. A mainstream fact, during the Ming dynasty, Eunuch Wei Zhongxian practically ruled China in the early 1600s. He controlled appointments, dictated imperial edicts, and punished rivals with terrifying swiftness. Ministers feared him more than they feared the emperor, and yet officially he was just a palace servant. That's the leash, soft velvet in appearance but tight around the throat of the entire bureaucracy. Your days begin to change. No more endless sweeping of corridors or polishing of shoes. You're handed scrolls sealed with wax, told to deliver them not to a clerk but directly into the trembling hands of a minister. You bow, you step back, and you watch men with titles stumble over their words in your presence. Strange, isn't it? The knife that once made you powerless now makes others powerless before you. Here's a quirky tidbit. In Byzantium, eunuchs sometimes rose so high that they led armies. Imagine the sight, an altered court servant in glittering armor shouting orders on the battlefield while soldiers called him Lord. Talk about breaking job descriptions. Historians still argue whether soldiers truly respected their eunuch commanders or simply obeyed out of fear of imperial punishment. Either way, when you ride at the head of a column, the world sees power. Not the absence behind your robes. But this rise isn't free. The leash never leaves your neck. Every step you take toward influence is shadowed by suspicion. Other eunuchs eye you with envy. Ministers mutter behind closed doors, calling you unnatural, corrupt, dangerous. They see you as both joke and threat, and that contradiction keeps the leash taut. At any moment the emperor could pull it tighter, or let it slip just enough for you to think you're free. You glide through lacquered halls with scrolls in hand, but you're also carrying something heavier. The weight of knowing your survival depends on balancing ambition and obedience. Too ambitious, and you'll be executed for treason. Too obedient, and you'll fade into obscurity. Just another name forgotten among tens of thousands. It's a delicate dance, like tiptoeing across a rope strung between two towers. There's humor in this if you tilt your head just right. Picture yourself holding a tray of pearls for the empress, bowing politely while knowing you have the ear of her husband, or carrying incense to the emperor's private shrine while silently keeping a mental ledger of which ministers are rising and which are falling. It's almost like being the palace's gossip app, except instead of push notifications, you deliver news in whispers. Yet sometimes the leash slackens enough to taste freedom. You sip fine tea, wear silk robes, maybe even own a small villa inside the palace complex. Servants bow to you, though you were once a servant yourself. You sit in the garden, lotus blossoms reflecting in a still pond, and for a brief moment you imagine you've truly risen above it all. But then comes the tug, the emperor calling you at midnight, demanding an errand, or reminding you that without his favor, you're nothing. It's a velvet leash, yes, but still a leash, and you can't ever forget who holds the other end. Historians still argue whether eunuchs like Wei Zhongxian and others protected dynasties through loyalty or corrupted them with greed and manipulation. Were they guardians of the throne or termites hollowing it out from within? As you shuffle back to your chamber tonight, scrolls delivered and whispers planted, you don't have the luxury of asking. You just know the leash is there, coiled softly around your neck, reminding you that your power is never entirely your own. You move deeper into the palace maze, the velvet leash tugging you along, but now the real currency of your life begins to reveal itself. Not coins, not jewels, but whispers. The air here seems thick with them, clinging to the carved wooden beams and curling like incense smoke. You lean against a cool stone pillar and you hear it, fragments of sentences, sharp laughter cut short, the sound of secrets sliding from one chamber to another. You've become the courier of silence, the unseen messenger whose presence doesn't alarm. Ministers lower their voices when courtiers pass, but not when you slip by. To them, you're just the eunuch, and that blindness is your camouflage. With a scroll tucked beneath your sleeve or a folded note hidden in your sash, you ferry words that can crown a favorite or destroy a rival. A mainstream fact. In the Forbidden City, eunuchs often controlled the emperor's memorials, those official petitions ministers submitted for review. By filtering, delaying, or even losing certain documents, eunuchs shaped policy as effectively as any council. Imagine being the gatekeeper of every suggestion your boss ever received. Delete, highlight, or drop it in the shredder. Sounds like power disguised as paperwork. The whispers are intoxicating. You know who visited which chamber at what hour, which concubine laughed a little too freely, which minister left a meeting pale and trembling. You hold them all like delicate porcelain, turning them over, deciding which ones to trade. Whisper too much, and you're branded a snake. Whisper too little, and you fade into the wallpaper. Here's a quirky tidbit. One eunuch in the Ming court was said to communicate secrets by teaching his pet parrot phrases like, "The minister is doomed" and "The empress is angry." Imagine overhearing a bird spill palace tea louder than TikTok drama. Some said the parrot saved its masters life by blurting out warnings at the right time. You can't decide if that's genius or just very convenient storytelling. Historians still argue whether eunuchs intentionally weaponized gossip to rise or if the palace system forced them into it. After all, when you're denied family, property, or heirs, whispers are the only wealth left to pass on. Either way, you feel the pull of it in your bones, the thrill of carrying something no one else knows. Tonight, as you drift down a lacquered hallway lined with silk scrolls, you catch a scene. Behind one screen, a minister kneels, his forehead pressed to the floor. The emperor's voice is low, steady, impossible to decipher. But then the minister stumbles out, face ashen, and he locks eyes with you for just a second. He knows you heard something. You know he knows. That's the tension of your life. Each silence is its own bargain. Sometimes the whispers are lighter, almost playful. A concubine complaining about the emperor's snoring, or a guard bragging he can lift a bronze incense burner one-handed. You tuck those away too, because even small gossip can grow teeth later. But the heavier whispers, those are dangerous. Rumors of rebellion in the provinces, whispers that the treasury is empty, hints that the empress is plotting, or worse, that the emperor himself is sick. You feel them settle on your shoulders, heavier than the silk robe you wear. You don't just carry secrets, you become them. And the irony? Everyone depends on you, but no one ever thanks you. You pass along a whisper that saves a minister's life and he doesn't even meet your eyes. You deliver a secret that secures the Empress's place, and she waves you away like dust. You're vital yet invisible, like the wires behind a lantern that make the glow possible but never get praised. You settle in a darkened corner, listening to the echoes of footsteps and the shuffle of robes. Somewhere in this palace, another eunuch is doing the same, whispering about you even as you whisper about him. That's the cycle. A palace built not just of stone and gold, but of murmurs. Delicate, dangerous, unforgettable. You keep drifting through the palace, but now the corridors twist toward a different kind of world, softly perfumed, brightly lit, humming with voices pitched low but laced with laughter. You're at the threshold of the women's quarters, the harem, where concubines live behind carved screens and silk curtains. And you, altered, untouchable, are one of the only men allowed to pass freely inside. Gatekeeper of concubines. That's the strange title you never asked for, but must wear every day. The door slides open with a creak, and at once the air changes. It's thick with sandalwood and the faint sweetness of jasmine. Painted faces glance up from mirrors, jeweled hairpins glint like stars. You shuffle carefully, too fast and you risk suspicion, too slow, and you invite teasing. These women, cloistered for life, see you as both furniture and lifeline. You bring messages, gifts, rumors, sometimes even their only chance at the emperor's attention. A mainstream fact, in the Ottoman Empire, the chief black eunuch, known as the Kislar R, controlled not only the harem but often imperial succession itself. He decided which concubine had access to the sultan, and by extension who might bear the next heir. Imagine being the human calendar that schedules the birth of princes. You hold dynasties in your calloused hands, but in the moment it doesn't feel grand, it feels awkward. You walk between low tables stacked with rouge and powder, past women giggling behind silk fans, and you can sense their relief. You're not a rival, not a danger, not even really a man in their eyes. One splashes you with a playful handful of rose water, and everyone laughs. You force a smile, bow slightly, then shuffle onward. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some courts, concubines treated eunuchs almost like girlfriends. They'd share gossip, ask for fashion advice, even let eunuchs try on perfume. Imagine being told, G asked, "Does this silk robe make me look royal enough?" and trying not to snort rice wine out your nose. Of course, you'd never admit it, but sometimes you enjoy those fleeting moments of normality, laughter that doesn't involve plots or punishments. Historians still argue whether eunuchs abused this trust or honored it. Were they confidants who protected women's secrets, or opportunists who used access to manipulate from the shadows? The truth probably depends on the man and the moment. As you stand guard outside the Empress's chamber, you hear a soft quarrel inside. The Empress accuses a younger concubine of stealing a jade hairpin. Voices rise, then fall into icy silence. Moments later, you're summoned. The Empress thrusts the hairpin into your hands. "Deliver this to the Emperor," she says, her tone sharp as steel. You bow, heart pounding, because you know this isn't about jewelry, it's about status, punishment, maybe even exile. And you are the thread weaving their quarrels into imperial judgment. Yet there's an odd comfort in these scented corridors. The outside ministers see you as a freak, a schemer, a threat. But here among the concubines, you're simply part of the scenery. You carry trays of fruit, fold silk sheets, announce visitors. Some treat you kindly, some with disdain, but few see you as dangerous. That's its own strange kind of relief. Late at night, you pass through the women's garden. Moonlight falls across koi ponds, pavilions glowing with lantern light. Concubines in loose robes walk arm in arm, giggling about some trivial thing you'll never understand. You pause at the gate, half guard, half ghost. For a moment you envy their laughter, even if it's confined within these walls. You realize you are free to move in and out, but never truly belong on either side. And so you stand, the gatekeeper, respected, resented, sometimes ignored. You guard beauty but never taste it. You protect intimacy but never share it. You hold keys to chambers where dynasties are born, but your own lineage ends before it begins. The irony bites sharper than any knife ever did. Word count, 1080. The days stretch long, and hunger is a quieter companion than fear or ambition. You slip from the perfumed harem into the plain corridors where meals are served. The echo of laughter fades, replaced by the hollow clatter of bowls and the thin scrape of chopsticks on cheap wood. Here, in the eunuch's dining hall, the grandeur of the empire shrinks into bland rice and silence. You shuffle forward in line, bowl in hand, and the smell is always the same. Boiled grain, maybe a splash of broth if fortune smiles, a lonely piece of pickled radish if the kitchen felt generous. You don't eat for pleasure. You eat to keep moving, to survive another dawn of endless errands. You sit cross-legged at a low bench, chewing slowly, and the sound of chewing becomes the soundtrack of the room. Talking is rare, trust doesn't come easy when gossip can kill. A mainstream fact, records from the Forbidden City describe the eunuch meals as intentionally plain, stripped of variety, while emperors dined on feasts of hundreds of dishes. The contrast was deliberate, a daily reminder of rank and power. You don't need guards if the food itself teaches you your place. Still, meals aren't just fuel, they're rituals of hierarchy. The senior eunuchs eat first, their bowls filled slightly higher, their seats closer to the fire in winter. The younger ones wait, watching steam curl upward as their own food cools. You notice the way eyes dart, not at the food itself, but at each other, gauging who lingers near whom, who dares whisper even in this silence. Sometimes a flicker of humor breaks the monotony. A eunuch leans close, muttering a sarcastic prayer. May the emperor's banquet leftovers fall into our bowls. Another jokes about the rice being so bland it could put poets to sleep faster than opium. You stifle a laugh because laughter in here is dangerous. It reminds you that you're still human. Here, as a quirky tidbit, in some courts, eunuchs became connoisseurs of palace waste. They'd sniff out discarded scraps from the emperor's table, claiming the food carried luck, or at least a richer flavor. Imagine gnawing on a chicken bone tossed aside by the ruler of a dynasty. Gourmet recycling, centuries before the term existed. Historians still argue whether eunuchs embraced the simplicity of these meals as a discipline, a sign of devotion, or whether resentment simmered silently in every bite of cold rice. Did the plain diet make them loyal or bitter? Perhaps both. Each mouthful is a lesson in humility, but also a reminder of everything denied. You finish your portion quickly, licking a grain of rice from your finger, though you know better than to look greedy. Hunger becomes second nature. It teaches patience, teaches you to savor scraps of flavor. One night, a senior eunuch slips you a sliver of roasted duck skin, smuggled from the royal kitchens. The taste is so rich it almost hurts, a cruel glimpse of what you'll never have again. After meals, the silence doesn't end, it lingers. You carry your empty bowl back through the corridors and your stomach hums faintly like a hollow drum. You hear the emperor's musicians playing somewhere distant, strings plucked in a room glowing with lanterns while your teeth still grind leftover rice husks. The contrast is endless, and it seeps into your dreams. Later, on your mat in the cloistered chambers, you hear other eunuchs shifting, their stomachs growling in chorus. It's a strange kind of unity, the music of hunger binding you together. You roll to your side, pulling your thin blanket close, and think, maybe tomorrow the broth will have more flavor, maybe tomorrow the rice will feel less like dust. But tomorrow rarely changes. The meals remain bland, the silence thick, the hierarchy sharp. And you realize that in this palace even food has politics, and your bowl is a mirror of your place in the world, necessary but never full. Your stomach may still grumble from those meager meals, but tonight your thoughts are pulled in a stranger direction, the realm of remedies. Palace life has always been obsessed with health, longevity, and warding off death, especially when the rulers believed their own bodies were the center of the universe. And you, as a eunuch, get caught in that swirling tide of potions, ointments, and bizarre cures that range from mildly useful to utterly ridiculous. You sit cross-legged near the infirmary, the sharp smell of dried herbs hanging heavy in the air. Jars line the shelves, roots, powders, oils, each one promising to restore vigor or balance the spirit. Physicians bustle in and out, robes swishing, their whispers equal parts science and superstition. You're offered a bitter brew, and though it tastes like mud scraped off a temple floor, You drink it because refusing would be a kind of rebellion. A mainstream fact, traditional Chinese medicine placed enormous emphasis on yin and yang balance. Eunuchs considered altered were thought to have disrupted balances that required constant correction. Tonics of ginseng, licorice root, and deer antler velvet were common prescriptions. You sip them dutifully, half believing, half resigned. But sometimes the cures go beyond strange into the absurd. Someone smears your forehead with crushed pearls mixed in vinegar, promising to restore lost vitality. Another insists you swallow powdered jade to strengthen the spirit. Spoiler alert, jade tastes like chalk and does nothing except make your teeth grit. Here's that quirky tidbit you can't shake. In ancient Egypt, crocodile dung was used as a medical paste, sometimes even as contraception. Now imagine a palace doctor waving a jar under your nose, insisting this smelly sludge will protect your health. You'd think they were joking until you realize they're dead serious. You piece. Timbar. Probably won't survive picturing that too vividly. Historians still argue whether palace medicine was truly about healing or about control. Were eunuchs given treatments to genuinely support their fragile health, or were they experimental subjects used to test new concoctions before nobles dared to try? It's hard to tell, but you often suspect the latter, especially when a doctor looks at you like a walking laboratory. The infirmary is also a theatre of fear. You watch another eunuch stagger in, pale and trembling, after collapsing in the courtyard. Physicians swarm, pressing needles into his skin, muttering about blocked chi. You avert your eyes when the man winces, because you know tomorrow it could be you. The palace demands obedience, not wellness. If a potion works, fine. If it doesn't, there's always another eunuch to replace you. Sometimes the remedies feel comforting, though. A hot compress on aching legs, a sweet syrup of honey and herbs for your throat, a steam bath scented with camphor. In those moments, you almost forget the strangeness of it all. You close your eyes, breathing in the vapor, and imagine you're somewhere far from marble corridors and velvet leashes. And yet deep down, you know these treatments aren't just about health, they're about symbolism. Eunuchs are supposed to embody purity, service, and endurance. If you fall sick too often, it cracks the illusion. So, remedies are poured down your throat, not to heal you, but to preserve the image of the flawless palace machine. Late at night, lying on your mat, you feel the lingering sting of cupping marks on your back, or the bitterness of herbs still on your tongue. You roll to one side and whisper to a fellow eunuch, "If crocodile dung really worked, we'd all live forever." He stifles a laugh, then quickly silences himself. Joking about medicine can be as dangerous as mocking the emperor. Still, the thought lingers. Remedies in this palace are never just about healing. They're about power, about control, about forcing bodies to bend to the empire's will. And you, altered and forgotten, are the perfect test subject, swallowing the empire's fears one bitter cup at a time. You shuffle from the smoky infirmary back into the main courtyards, and soon enough the rhythm of duty overtakes you again. Palace life is not measured in free moments, but in rituals, precise, rigid, endless. From dawn's first bell until the last lantern is snuffed, you are carried along in a tide of ceremonies that demand your voice, your posture, your silence. You stand, you kneel, you bow, you chant. The palace breathes through you like a machine that never sleeps. Every morning begins with the striking of the great bell. Its low boom rattles through your bones and announces the day's choreography. You hurry to your assigned post, sometimes sweeping incense ash from temple floors, sometimes carrying ritual objects into the emperor's hall, sometimes simply standing still, hands folded while the world of nobles unfolds before you. Stillness is its own duty. It can feel harder than motion. A mainstream fact: in the Ming and Qing courts, eunuchs were responsible for countless ceremonial roles, lighting incense, preparing ritual vessels, even intoning chants during ancestral sacrifices. The emperor relied on their precision because mistakes in ritual were seen as cosmic errors that could offend heaven itself. Imagine dropping a bronze vessel mid-ceremony. That's not just clumsy, it's an omen. The duties often stretch for hours. You stand in stiff robes that itch against your skin, sweat dripping down your back, but your expression must stay blank. The emperor enters, clad in embroidered dragons, and the room collectively inhales. You bow so low your forehead nearly dents the floor. Then you hold still like furniture. Sometimes you wonder if the emperor even sees you, or if he only sees the perfection of ritual, the smooth running of ceremony. Here's a quirky tidbit. Eunuchs sometimes doubled as human alarm clocks. If a noble or official overslept on a day of ceremony, eunuchs would bang gongs outside their quarters or even splash cold water until the man stumbled awake. It's the historical equivalent of setting a very aggressive iPhone alarm but with more bruised egos. Historians still argue whether eunuchs' participation in ritual duties granted them spiritual authority or whether they were simply treated as anonymous stagehands. Were you a priestly presence, channeling order from heaven to earth, or just another prop in the emperor's theatre? The truth, as always, sits somewhere in between. One afternoon you find yourself holding a ceremonial fan carved from ivory, standing at the emperor's side as he prays to the ancestors. The incense smoke curls upward, stinging your eyes, and you can feel every muscle trembling from staying still so long. But you cannot falter. If the emperor falters, history shifts. If you falter, no one remembers. And yet, amid the rigidity, strange humour sneaks in. Once, a fellow eunuch sneezes during a solemn chant. The room goes dead silent. The emperor narrows his eyes, and everyone holds their breath. Then, with a faint smirk, the emperor waves it off, and the chant resumes. Later, back in the cloistered chambers, you laugh about it until your ribs ache. A sneeze almost cracked the empire. The rituals become a rhythm etched into your bones. Walk 3 steps, bow, place incense, bow again, intone the words you barely understand. You could do it half asleep, and sometimes you practically do, but the monotony hides danger. Slip once, and your body may be whipped, or worse. By evening, the last rituals end with lanterns lit in orderly rows, flames glowing like stars trapped in glass. You shuffle back through the corridors, body stiff, mind numbed by repetition. Still, there's a strange comfort in the predictability. The palace is chaos in whispers, but in ritual it becomes order. You lie down that night, still hearing the echo of chants in your head, as if the palace is whispering through your very breath. Tomorrow, the same duties will call and the cycle will repeat. It's not freedom, but it's survival. The rituals fade into silence, but as you drift along the shadowed corridors, another truth settles over you. History rarely remembers you. The emperors' names are carved in stone, their victories etched into bronze bells, their tombs grand enough to rival mountains. And you fade like smoke from incense, leaving barely a trace in dusty scrolls. Your presence is felt in the machinery of empire, but your name rarely survives the ink. You shuffle into the record halls where scribes bend over bamboo slips or thick stacks of paper. Brushes scratch steadily, recording wars, decrees, treaties, and poems. You watch as an entire dynasty is preserved line by line, yet none of those lines will say, "A eunuch carried this order, whispered this warning, delivered this bowl of ink." You are there in every corner, yet invisible on every page. A mainstream fact, the Ming Shilu, or veritable records of the Ming dynasty, fills hundreds of volumes with court proceedings, edicts, and histories. Eunuchs appear only sporadically, often as villains in later edits, accused of corruption or manipulation. Rarely are they described as human beings with lives and feelings. You exist as footnotes, not as stories, and still, you know you shape the story more than many generals ever did. You carried the emperor's memorials, you controlled who entered the throne room, you whispered in the right ear at the right time. The empire's heartbeat often pulsed through your quiet hands. Yet when history retells it, those hands vanish and only the throne remains. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some cases, eunuchs tried to cheat oblivion by sponsoring temples or carving their names onto statues. One Ming eunuch even had a giant stone stele raised with his autobiography, an entire monument proclaiming, "I was here, I mattered." Imagine carving your LinkedIn resume into rock just so history couldn't ghost you. Historians still argue whether the erasure of eunuchs from records was deliberate, an act of moral judgment by Confucian scholars who disdained unnatural servants, or whether it was simply the byproduct of focusing on emperors and ministers. Either way, the result is the same. Your voice is silenced, your shadow blurred out. You wander deeper into the hall, the smell of ink and dust filling your nose. The scribes ignore you, their brushes moving in steady rhythm. You glance at one scroll, a decree about taxes, another about military campaigns, and wonder, will anyone ever know that you were the one who carried it here? Or will it seem, centuries from now, as if these words appeared by magic, untouched by your weary hands? Here's a joke among your fellow eunuchs. We write history with our feet, walking it from chamber to chamber, but the historians only write us when they need a villain. You laugh bitterly, but it's true. In official annals, you're either a schemer who poisoned the dynasty or a ghost who never existed at all. No middle ground. You think of your brothers, long gone, their names swallowed by silence. Men who spent 40 years pacing palace halls, bowing, whispering, carrying, surviving, and then were erased the moment their mats were folded for the last time. You know you'll likely join them, another shadow absorbed into the palace walls. But tonight you pause at a window where moonlight spills across the courtyard. You rest your hand on the sill and let yourself imagine, just for a heartbeat, that someone in the future will picture you, not by name, not with precision, but enough to know you were here, that you lived and whispered and mattered, even if the scrolls never said so. And then you step away, your shadow melting back into the endless corridors where the Empire's story continues without you. The palace seems eternal, its corridors looping like a labyrinth that feeds on footsteps. Yet beneath the incense smoke and glittering ceremonies lies a tension as sharp as a hidden blade. Tonight you sense it in the air, rebellion murmuring just beyond the tapestries, a low current that hums through whispers. You feel your chest tighten because when eunuchs murmur together, sometimes dynasties tremble. It starts small. 2 eunuchs in the dining hall exchange a glance over bowls of rice. Another leans against a doorway pretending to nap while his ears catch every word of passing ministers. You've lived in this hive long enough to know when whispers aren't harmless gossip but sparks. They spread quickly, weaving through chambers, growing hotter with every retelling. Soon enough, the palace feels less like a fortress and more like a pot about to boil. A mainstream fact, during the later Ming dynasty, eunuchs often seized immense control, sometimes defying the scholar officials outright. In 1624, the infamous eunuch Wei Zhongxian orchestrated purges against his rivals, using his network to imprison and even execute officials who opposed him. He wasn't just whispering in ears, he was steering the entire ship of state. Ministers trembled and some called it rule by the knife without a knife. The irony, eunuchs were never supposed to lead, they were designed, literally altered to be harmless. Yet when denied family, denied legacy, denied dignity, many turned to power as the only inheritance left. You shuffle through the corridors tonight hearing fragments. The minister is weak, the emperor is ill, the treasury is empty. These are not random complaints, they are threads of a net being woven. Here's a quirky tidbit. In 9th century Baghdad, some eunuchs were rumored to carry coded messages stitched into their robes, patterns in embroidery, swirls of gold thread, knots in unusual places, were said to be signals for rebellion or alliances. Imagine staring at a robe and realizing it's basically the ancient world's encrypted email, fashion as treason. Historians still argue whether eunuchs toppled dynasties out of greed or whether they were scapegoats, blamed when empires were already rotting from within. Were they the termites or just the flickering candlelight that revealed the cracks in the palace walls? Either way, when rebellion stirs, it's often eunuchs who feel the tremors first. You recall one winter night. A eunuch stumbles into the chamber, face pale, whispering that soldiers in the outer garrison have mutinied. Instantly, silence falls. No one dares to speak above a breath, but everyone feels it. If rebellion reaches the inner gates, eunuchs will be first to fall. Guards will not protect you. Nobles will not defend you. You are both the keepers of secrets and the most expendable. Yet, sometimes eunuchs are not victims, but players. You remember being summoned by a senior eunuch, his voice low as he pressed a sealed scroll into your hand. "Deliver this at once," he said. You didn't ask where it came from, but the seal wasn't imperial, it was rebellion dressed in wax. Your feet carried treason that night, and though you never spoke of it, the weight of that scroll still lingers in your bones. The fear is constant, but so is the thrill. Imagine standing in a courtyard at midnight, lantern light trembling on the walls, while 50 eunuchs gather silently, deciding whether to support a new heir or betray the current one. You feel like you're inside a theatre play, except the stage is real and the consequences are lethal. And still, there's dark humour. One eunuch jokes that the emperor should install revolving thrones, so everyone can try a turn without all the drama. Another mutters that rebellion isn't so bad, as long as the kitchen keeps serving rice during it. You laugh, but the laughter dies quickly because tomorrow one of those jokers might disappear and no one will dare to mention his name. You end the night lying on your mat, the whispers of rebellion buzzing in your ears like angry bees. You close your eyes, wondering, will tomorrow dawn with the same emperor on the throne, or will the palace gates creak open to a new master? Either way, you will still be here, walking softly, carrying secrets, your survival balanced on the sharp edge of silence. You've lived long enough inside these palace walls to know that secrets don't stay contained. They travel with you, sometimes far beyond the gates, into lands where the language is strange and the customs stranger still. Tonight, your sandals crunch over gravel roads outside the capital, and for the first time in months, the sky above feels wider. You're on a mission abroad, one of the odd roles eunuchs were often given. Imperial envoy, foreign negotiator, the face of the dynasty in distant lands. It feels surreal. You, who once scrubbed floors in silence, now carry scrolls sealed with the emperor's mark. Your robes are clean, your carriage lacquered, and soldiers march in neat lines at your side. Foreigners will bow to you not because of who you are, but because of who you represent, a man with no family, no children, no legacy, yet tonight you speak with the emperor's voice. A mainstream fact, the great Ming Admiral Zheng He, perhaps the most famous eunuch in history, commanded massive fleets in the 15th century. His ships were said to dwarf those of Columbus, sailing across the Indian Ocean to East Africa. He brought giraffes to China as tribute, dazzling the court. Imagine that, an altered servant, leading the world's largest naval expeditions, proof that even those the empire cut down could rise to unimaginable heights. Still, stepping into foreign lands isn't all honor. Sometimes you feel like a curiosity, a human oddity. Locals stare at you with tilted heads, whispering to each other. Are you a priest, a sorcerer, a man, or something else? In some markets, children tug at their mothers' sleeves, pointing at you as if you're a walking myth. You smile faintly, but inside you feel the sting of being studied like an animal in a traveling menagerie. Here's a quirky tidbit. On one of Zheng He's voyages, the Chinese fleet brought back ostriches. Palace staff who had never seen such birds believed they were a type of dragon chick. Imagine the emperor peering at a tall, awkward ostrich and declaring, "Yes, surely this will breathe fire once it grows up." That's the kind of misunderstanding that turns into legend overnight. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were chosen for these missions because of loyalty or because they were expendable. If you failed, the dynasty lost no bloodline. If you succeeded, the emperor gained prestige. Either way, your body became a vessel of empire, sailing across oceans or trudging across deserts, carrying authority carved from silence. On the road, nights feel long. You sit by a fire, the stars spread like spilled salt above, and you hear soldiers snore nearby. Your robe smells of travel dust, your sandals worn thin. But then you remember the scroll tucked inside your chest wrap, the emperor's seal glowing faintly in the firelight. That fragile piece of paper gives you more power than any sword around the fire. If you choose to speak, entire treaties may shift. If you choose to withhold, alliances crumble. It's a strange kind of weapon, one without a blade. Sometimes the encounters are dazzling. You walk into a foreign palace lined with ivory pillars where kings or sultans sit beneath jeweled canopies. They look at you with curiosity, but when you unfurl the emperor's decree, their eyes widen. You aren't just a eunuch, you are China, Byzantium, the empire itself wrapped in one altered body. You bow slowly, savoring that moment of power, even though you know it isn't really yours. And yet loneliness travels with you. At feasts, nobles toast with wine and laugh with their sons, their brothers. You sip carefully, smiling, but there's no one who shares your blood, no one who will carry your stories when you're gone. You're honored, yes, but hollow, a vessel that carries glory without ever keeping any for itself. Still, when you return to the capital, dust on your robes and foreign gifts stacked high, the palace bows to your success. For a brief moment you taste triumph. You've walked lands few of your brothers will ever see. You've been stared at like a curiosity, bowed to like a king, and used like a tool. That contradiction follows you through the gates, whispering a truth you can't quite shake. You've carried empires farther than most men ever dream, and yet, when the scrolls are written, your name may still vanish like sand in the wind. The journey abroad fades into memory, and soon you find yourself once again enclosed by palace walls. But now, something feels different. You have tasted respect, or at least glimpsed it, and the contrast makes your quarters feel smaller, your bowl of rice blander. Yet in truth, even here in the heart of the empire, you sometimes touch luxuries most commoners would never dream of. Silk brushing against your skin, jade rings slipped onto your fingers, the aroma of roasted duck wafting through kitchens reserved for the elite. But alongside every luxury comes a sharp reminder of what you cannot have. You stroke the sleeve of a robe dyed deep crimson. It shimmers under lantern light, softer than anything you wore as a child. You remember your village clothes, coarse hemp, always itchy, always patched. Now, silk pools like water in your hands. You've risen far, and yet the fabric feels less like a prize and more like a costume. It masks what was taken, not what was gained. A mainstream fact, eunuchs in both China and the Ottoman Empire sometimes amassed staggering wealth. Some owned mansions, libraries, even private staffs. Ming eunuchs were known to collect bribes, while Ottoman eunuchs received gifts from queens and concubines. At their peak, they rivaled ministers in luxury, their treasuries fat while their bodies remained empty. Yet with every sip of fine tea, you remember the hollow inside. The flavors are rich, osmanthus blossoms steeped with green leaves, perfumed and soothing. But there's no family to share it with, no son to teach the art of brewing. You drink alone, savoring, then swallow a bitterness that has nothing to do with the tea. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some courts, eunuchs grew so wealthy that they sponsored plays or operas. Imagine commissioning a grand performance only to sit in the shadows, forbidden to marry, forbidden to pass wealth to heirs. He actors get applause, you get a hollow echo in a gilded hall. Still you attend, because watching stories of love and war reminds you of emotions you'll never act out yourself. Historians still argue whether eunuchs clung to luxury as compensation for their loss, or whether luxury was simply thrust upon them as part of palace politics. Did they hoard riches out of greed, or did silks and gold serve as armor against the humiliation etched into their very bodies? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps it depends on which eunuch you ask, though few would dare answer honestly. You walk through your quarters, now decorated with scroll paintings and polished vases. Servants bow to you, though not long ago you were bowing to everyone. You tell yourself this is power, this is wealth, this is a victory over what was cut away. But then you catch sight of yourself in a bronze mirror. The face staring back is smooth, ageless in a way that feels uncanny. Your jaw lacks the heaviness of other men your age. You look younger, softer, forever incomplete. No amount of silk can hide that. At feasts, nobles gorge on meat and wine, and sometimes, if fortune tilts, you're invited. You sit among them, tasting flavors beyond the bland rice of the eunuch hall. Fatty pork melts on your tongue, candied fruits stick to your fingers. You chew slowly, watching laughter ripple among fathers and sons, brothers teasing brothers. You smile politely, but the laughter doesn't ripple into you. It never will. One evening, a concubine passes you a sweet pear, its juice dripping as you bite into it. The flavor is heavenly, but her laughter as she says, "Don't drip on your robe, brother," stings deeper. Brother, she calls you, but not the way she'd call her true kin. It's a reminder that you are kinless, defined only by service. Still, the luxuries pile up. Silk bedding, sandalwood combs, silver hairpins you don't even use. You arrange them neatly as if order will fill the void. Yet each trinket feels like a reminder of what's denied. A child to inherit them, a family shrine to display them, a name that would carry on once you're gone. As you lie down that night on a bed softer than clouds, you realize luxury is its own kind of prison. The silks caress you, but they also bind you. Gold glitters, but it blinds you from what you've lost. The world may see you as wealthy, fortunate even, but you know the truth. You have everything, except the one thing that makes everything matter. The silks and gold surround you, yet you know the truth. Outside your chamber, you are ridiculed as much as you are feared. You can feel it in the way courtiers laugh behind sleeves when you walk past, or how soldiers snicker when they think you're out of earshot. You've become a paradox, mocked for what was cut away, yet dreaded for the power it gave you, ridiculed and feared in equal measure. It starts with the jokes. You hear them everywhere, thinly veiled jabs about your voice, your body, your incompleteness. Ministers, emboldened by wine, smirk about eunuchs being half men, while guards whisper that your spirit's in human clothing. The words sting, but you learn quickly to let your expression stay blank. If you flinch, you've already lost. And yet those same mouths that mock you will turn pale when you enter the emperor's chamber ahead of them, because you can whisper into the ruler's ear. You can delay their petitions. You can tilt your head ever so slightly while carrying a decree, and suddenly their careers hang by a thread. You are both punchline and executioner, and no one quite knows which side of you they should fear more. A mainstream fact, in the Byzantine Empire, eunuchs could rise to some of the highest positions of state, even serving as generals or patriarchs of the church. At the same time, ordinary citizens often mocked them as unnatural, suspect, or dangerous. They were seen as essential tools of power, yet also as figures of suspicion. The contradiction was baked into the system. One afternoon, you walk past a group of young guards. They're laughing, tossing dice, but the moment they spot you, their laughter falters. One of them smirks, mutters a word, something cutting, something about your missing manhood. You stop. You don't glare, you don't scold, you just pause, let the silence hang heavy, and then shuffle forward with your usual calm. Hours later, when an imperial order reassigns that same guard to latrine duty for a month, his smirk disappears. You never said a word. You didn't need to. Here's a quirky tidbit. In Ottoman palaces, eunuchs were sometimes believed to carry curses. If a eunuch brushed against a pregnant woman, people whispered that it could harm the unborn child. Imagine being treated like a walking hex, part man, part superstition. At the same time, mothers also tied amulets blessed by eunuchs onto their children for protection, feared and revered, sometimes in the same breath. Historians still argue whether eunuchs deliberately cultivated this aura of dread to counter their ridicule, or if it simply grew naturally from their ambiguous place in society. Were they schemers building myths about themselves, or were the myths projected onto them by anxious nobles who couldn't reconcile respect with mockery? The debate lingers, just as your shadow lingers in the halls. You notice it most at banquets. A noble makes a crude joke at your expense, drawing chuckles from his peers. But when you rise silently to pour the emperor's wine, their laughter dies mid-breath. Their eyes follow you, wary, as if you might spill more than wine, perhaps a whispered accusation, perhaps a secret they didn't know you held. That's when the power settles in your chest, balancing out the sting of mockery. Still, in private, the ridicule gnaws at you. Lying on your mat, you remember the jeers from your village when you first returned altered, the cruel songs boys sang about your body. You've buried those memories under layers of silk and authority, but sometimes late at night they claw back to the surface. The laughter echoes louder than the emperor's praise. And yet you survive by turning ridicule into armor. If they see you as monstrous, fine, monsters are feared. If they call you unnatural, fine, you are an unnatural force in their carefully ordered world. They laugh at you in daylight, but they bow to you in candlelight. One evening, as lanterns glow in the courtyard, you pause by a reflecting pool. Your face stares back, smooth, ageless, unreadable. You whisper to yourself, "They may laugh, but they cannot ignore me." The ripples swallow your reflection, and you realize it's true. Mockery fades, but fear has longer legs. You wake before the bell and feel the palace breathing differently, as if the corridors themselves are holding their breath. This is how you know a change is coming, not from proclamations or drums, but from the way servants step lighter and guards grip their spears. Dynasties do not end with a bang, they exhale, and you've learned to hear the sigh. You tuck your robe, smooth the sleeve, and practice the most precious art a eunuch can master, adapting faster than rumor can travel. The first sign arrives as a rumor of illness. The emperor coughs behind screens, and physicians shuffle in and out like anxious cranes. Ministers grow polite in the way wolves get polite before choosing their next alpha. Concubines light extra incense and pretend they aren't counting their chances. You make yourself small, listening, because the fastest way into a dungeon is to be the last one to know the new master's favorite color. You've learned succession is not a single moment, it's a weather system. A mainstream fact steadies your thoughts. When the Ming dynasty collapsed in 1644, the Qing banners rolled through the passes and purged the Forbidden City. Eunuchs were executed, exiled, or quietly absorbed into the new hierarchy. Some fled with loyalists, others survived by learning new rituals, new greetings, even new recipes for imperial tea. The marble floors stayed the same, but the shoes walking them changed. You whisper this lesson like a prayer. Floors endure, names do not. You're good at rotation. One day you bow to a dying ruler, the next you bow to his son, nephew, or a general who discovers royal blood conveniently flowing in his veins. Your task is to become indispensable before anyone remembers to make you disposable. You present keys before being asked, rehearse new reign titles until they roll off your tongue like water, and smile at the right silences. If you stumble, so. Mion will kindly correct you with a whip. Palace feedback is motivational in its way. Here's a quirky tidbit. When reign titles changed, palace workshops often recarved date stamps overnight, chiseling until their fingers bled. Superstitious clerks hid the old seals in jars of rice to absorb the bad luck. Years later, one was found buried beneath a storehouse floor, as if bureaucracy itself had sprouted a ghost. Even paperwork feared change. The shift begins with symbols. Banners change color. Astrologers announce new lucky directions. The kitchen mysteriously favors dishes from the new clan's province. You drift with the tide, bowing at a different angle, reordering names in petitions, pronouncing the word heaven with just enough reverence to suggest eternity and just enough vagueness to avoid offending whoever currently claims it. The talent isn't to change your skin, it's to change your temperature so the next hand finds you warm. Historians still argue whether eunuchs prolonged failing regimes by keeping rituals alive or accelerated collapse by weaving private networks that drained the court. You feel that debate beating in your chest as you carry a lacquered tray down a hall that has outlived several emperors. Either way, when the storm breaks, you survive by habit. Move early, speak late, lend the new ruler a memory he doesn't have yet. Your father favored sandalwood incense at dawn, you murmur, but the northern wind suggests aloes wood. The boy nods, grateful for a past you invented on the spot. History arrives with captions. You supply the font. Of course, storms leave debris. After enthronement there are always lists. Some names vanish overnight, brushed out like smudges. You bow, escort a disgraced official to a courtyard and watch him bow to the wrong horizon. You feel nothing, or at least you perfect the act of feeling nothing. At night your pillow remembers the tears you never admit to shedding. Even in dread, comedy finds a crack. A minister praises the new monarch as the everlasting sun, especially at night. Another offers a gift too large to fit through the doorway, and 5 philosophers argue about how to rotate a bronze turtle. You stand neutral as a teapot, privately noting not to become the 6th philosopher. In the dormitories you joke softly, 3 laughs a day keep the executioner away. You survive by cataloguing continuities. The bell still tolls at dawn, the gardens still shine under moonlight, courtiers still trip on the same raised threshold you warned them about last year. Appetite never changes either. Feed a new ruler the right stories and you may feed yourself a few more decades. Offer him a polished mirror, let him admire the reflection you curated, and remind yourself that polishing and throat-cutting both glint the same under lamplight. You recall Byzantium, where eunuchs sometimes acted as regents for child emperors. A palace is a ship, and you have been rope, sail, and ballast. You hum the lullaby you learned in the dormitory, half comfort, half march, and your feet slip easily into the rhythm of the new reign. Your body keeps its own records. Each transition carves invisible notches into you, tally marks of borrowed loyalties. Under your mat you keep a small box filled with incense slivers from different reigns, cinnamon from one, spikenard from another. On restless nights you open it and inhale. It smells of temples, rain, and rooms where voices never rose above a whisper. You wonder what your scent will be when you're gone, probably paper, ash, and a touch of stubbornness. One afternoon, while banners are being re-hung, a boy prince, now emperor, asks whether the palace feels different. You smile gently. Majesty, the palace is always the same size, but some reigns breathe in and some breathe out. He nods, pleased at a wisdom you crafted to be just vague enough. Still, succession spills. A scribal error becomes treason when someone needs demoting. A misplaced key turns into legend when someone needs removing. Once you mislaid a stamp for an hour and returned to find 3 competing decrees already in circulation. You retrieved it, locked it down, and brewed calming tea for a minister who had aged 10 years in that hour. A brief delay, you said. He nodded, already erasing the disaster from memory. That's how dynasties survive, by forgetting on schedule. But not all change is neat. There are nights when drums thunder outside the gates and dawn opens with a new flag over the palace. You stand straight, as if posture were paperwork, and wait to see if you'll be counted among the living or the leftover inventory. You know the trick. Appear useful before anyone decides you aren't. When a conqueror asks your name, you answer with your function. Names die quickly, functions migrate. You keep talismans because you're human. Remember that crocodile dung remedy from years ago? You keep a pinch of dried herb in your sleeve, said to steady the spirit. You don't believe it, but you cling anyway. Superstition is just hope wearing a costume, and you've always been good at spotting costumes. When new edicts are read, you listen to tone, not words. Does the ruler crave devotion or competence? Does he see enemies between commas? You adjust your own punctuation accordingly, shorter replies for the paranoid, warmer silences for the sentimental. Power is an instrument. You tune yourself to its pitch. Years pile up. You outlast favorites who mocked you and favorites who defended you. You outlast queens who once gifted you fruit and generals who once pressed blades to your throat. You are still here because you learned to be slightly earlier than fear and slightly later than glory. The court calls it lu. Kek. You call it craft. And when, very late, an old brother from the dormitory asks if you ever tire of changing masters, you answer honestly, I do, but I tire more quickly of dungeons. He laughs, Sig, coughs and laughs again. The sound echoes in halls that have heard every kind of laughter and will keep listening long after you're gone. The bell sounds. Another dawn, another inhale or exhale of the palace. You rise, smooth your sleeve, and step forward to learn the next colour, the next bow, the next word for the same old sun. You never control the weather, but you've become the best reader of clouds. And in a world where storms strike the unprepared, reading is survival. The palace has seen dynasties rise and fall, but inside its courtyards there is another rhythm, one that doesn't belong to rulers or armies. It's the rhythm of prayer, of devotion, of incense smoke, curling into the sky like questions no emperor can answer. You've shuffled through ceremonies until your knees creaked, but faith is different. Faith whispers when the world shouts, and for a eunuch, faith can be both salve and salt. You step into the temple complex attached to the palace. The air here is cooler, shaded by tall pines, the sound of bells chiming softly in the breeze. The floor stones are worn smooth by centuries of kneeling, and you know your knees are just two more in that endless line. You bow, light a stick of incense and press it into the bronze vessel. Smoke unfurls upward, carrying your thoughts with it. The emperor might command armies, but even he can't command smoke. A mainstream fact: eunuchs in Ming and Qing dynasties often oversaw Buddhist or Taoist temples within palace grounds. Some became patrons of shrines, sponsoring statues or entire monasteries with their accumulated wealth. One eunuch even had his name carved onto the base of a massive bronze Buddha, hoping devotion would grant him what history denied: immortality in stone. Your devotion feels more private. You bow before statues of deities who never mock you, who never laugh at what's missing. You chant words you only half understand, but the cadence soothes you. Here you are not servant or schemer. You are a soul, however incomplete. But then the thought pierces you. Do the gods see you as whole, or are you altered even in their eyes? Historians still argue whether eunuchs embraced religion because they believed, or because it gave them political cover. You, caught between duty and longing, wonder if the difference even matters. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some Taoist rituals, powdered cinnabar was mixed into elixirs for immortality. Some eunuchs drank them faithfully, despite the fact cinnabar is mercury and slowly poisons the body. Imagine sipping liquid death with reverent gratitude, convinced you're swallowing eternity. You chuckle softly, then shake your head. Faith and folly are sometimes brewed in the same cup. But devotion offers comfort in strange ways. You remember one night when a fellow eunuch stumbled into the temple, tears streaking his face. His favorite concubine had been exiled, and though he could never claim her love, her absence hollowed him. He lit 3 sticks of incense, bowed until his forehead bled, and whispered, "If gods pity anyone, let it be those who cannot choose." You placed a hand on his shoulder, the only prayer you had left. The rituals become part of your body. You wake before dawn to strike bells that echo like a heartbeat through the palace. You sweep temple floors, your broom whispering across stone like another chant. You polish statues until your reflection looks back in bronze. Some nights you sit cross-legged in the quiet, letting the smoke curl around you, the silence almost warm enough to be company. Yet faith is not free from politics. Priests bow deeper to eunuchs who bring gifts. Ministers roll their eyes at your donations, calling them bribes wrapped in incense. And the emperor himself sometimes borrows your piety, parading it as proof of his closeness to heaven. You don't resent it. You've learned faith can be borrowed, traded, even staged. What matters is whether in the dead of night it still feels like your own. Sometimes humor sneaks in, even here. One junior eunuch tasked with feeding temple doves mutters that the birds are holier than him because they eat better. Another whispers during chanting that the gods must be deaf if they need us to shout this loud. You bite back laughter because if you snort mid-prayer, even stone Buddhas might glare. You notice, too, that temples preserve what palaces erase. Scrolls of prayers list donors' names, and your brothers carve theirs with pride. Here, in ink and wood, a eunuch's name can last longer than a dynasty's edict. You trace a name once, the brushstrokes trembling but defiant, and think, maybe this is how memory survives, not in chronicles of battles, but in small acts of devotion that outlast laughter. One winter night you kneel so long your knees go numb. Snowflakes drift through the open eaves, melting as they touch your sleeve. You whisper a prayer, not for power, not for favor, but simply for rest. You ask that when your time ends, your shadow won't be mocked, that your story won't be erased. You don't know if the gods hear, but the smoke rises steadily, as if something listens. You leave the temple, sandal steps crunching over frost. Behind you, the bells chime again, a sound that has rung through 100 rains and will ring through 100 more. Faith, you realize, is the only continuity greater than politics, and maybe, just maybe, it is the one place where your altered body doesn't matter, where you are simply a flicker of devotion fading into the sky. You've bowed in temples, whispered prayers into incense smoke, and walked away with questions instead of answers. But outside the still halls of devotion, another set of stories trails behind you. rumors that paint you not as faithful servant, but as something stranger. People have always loved their myths and monsters, and when they didn't understand you, they invented you. Eunuchs, they said, were sorcerers, demons, tragic heroes cursed by fate. And sometimes when you catch your reflection in polished bronze, you almost believe them. The palace itself feeds superstition. Ministers cross themselves or mutter charms when you pass. Concubines whisper that you can slip through doors without sound, like a ghost wearing shoes. Soldiers claim you can't die easily, that heaven keeps you walking as punishment, and you, shuffling in silence, half enjoy the unease. Fear is a shield sharper than steel. A mainstream fact, in ancient Rome, eunuchs were often associated with the cult of Cybele, a goddess whose priests were castrated men. Outsiders called them fanatics, sorcerers, and sometimes even unholy. In Byzantium, eunuchs were accused of witchcraft whenever they gained too much influence. History repeats the same pattern: confuse them, then fear them. You remember a night when a storm rattled the palace windows, lightning cracked across the sky, and a young servant whispered, "The eunuchs are calling demons again." You almost laughed, but his eyes were wide with terror. You realized then that myths cling tighter than truth. Better to be thought a demon than forgotten as dust. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some corners of China, peasants believed eunuchs could curse crops simply by walking across a field. Farmers avoided their shadows, fearing wilted wheat. Yet the same peasants also sought eunuchs' blessings for children, convinced that altered bodies carried strange fertili. Tai luck. Imagine being shunned and invited in the same breath, a walking paradox, a living superstition. Historians still argue whether eunuchs encouraged these myths for protection, or if they were powerless against them. Some claim the whispers about sorcery were useful, keeping rivals cautious. Others insist eunuchs hated the stories, wishing only to be seen as men of service. You know that truth lies somewhere in the shuffle between the two. At night, as you walk the lantern-lit corridors, shadows stretch long behind you. Another eunuch jokes that your shadow doesn't match your body, that it looks taller, straighter, almost like the man you might have been. The others laugh nervously, because who jokes about shadows in a palace already haunted by too many ghosts? You smirk, but the joke stays with you. Shadows lie, but they also reveal. Stories grow in the harem too. Concubines whisper about eunuchs turned into fox spirits, luring women with soft voices only to vanish into smoke. Some claim eunuchs can never truly die, that their souls wander palace walls, sighing into tapestries, forever seeking what they lost. You've felt that chill yourself late at night in the dormitory, when a draft brushes your face and you wonder if it's just the wind or a brother's ghost reminding you not to forget him. And then there are tales of tragic heroes. Eunuchs cast as martyrs who sacrificed not just flesh but future for the empire. Folk singers outside the walls sometimes wove ballads of the loyal eunuch who saved his emperor, only to die unthanked. You heard one once drifting through the courtyard from a nearby market. The singer's voice cracked on the final verse, and for a heartbeat you believed the song was yours. The irony is that myths can be both prison and protection. Call a eunuch a demon and he is untouchable. Call him cursed and no one dares strike him off. Penly, but call him tragic and he becomes a cautionary tale, not a man. You exist somewhere between monster and martyr, always one step removed from the human. Humor, as always, creeps in. One eunuch once pretended to curse a squeaky door by waving incense ash over it. When the hinges were oiled the next day and the squeak vanished, others bowed to him in mock reverence. He raised his arms dramatically and declared himself the spirit of smooth entrances. Laughter shook the dormitory that night, a reminder that if the world insists you're a monster, you might as well have fun with the role. Still, myths leave their mark. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the temple pond one evening, the water rippling under the moon. For a moment, the face staring back looks older, stranger, less human. You blink, and it's gone, just your own tired reflection, but you walk away uneasy, as though the myths have seeped into your bones. Later, lying on your mat, you hear whispers in the dark. Brothers trading stories of fox spirits, cursed eunuchs, demons that creep through palace corridors. You chuckle softly, but when the lamp sputters out, the shadows feel thicker than usual. You pull your blanket close, half mocking yourself, half comforted by the thought that maybe being a monster means you'll never truly vanish. Because in the end, myths are a kind of immortality. If the chronicles erase your name, maybe the ghost stories will keep your footsteps echoing a little longer. Demon or hero, cursed or sacred, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the palace will never quite forget you, no matter how hard it tries. The myths swirl around you, but when the incense clears, you hear another kind of whisper. One not from ministers or concubines, but from centuries later. Historians, scholars, storytellers arguing in libraries lit by fluorescent bulbs instead of lanterns. Their voices overlap across time. Were eunuchs protectors of empires or poison at the root? You can almost hear them, debating your worth long after your sandals have turned to dust. You imagine their faces frowning over scrolls and books. One insists you were loyal, that you kept emperors alive when courtiers schemed to kill them. Another declares you were corrupt, greedy, feeding on bribes and bending dynasties to your own gain. A third shrugs, muttering that you were simply survivors, too busy carrying trays and secrets to care about ideology. You lie on your mat, listening to voices that don't yet exist, and feel strangely amused. Even in death you won't get peace, just footnotes. A mainstream fact, the bad eunuch stereotype looms largest in Chinese history, especially figures like Wei Zhongxian, who controlled appointments and purges in the late Ming. He's often painted as a tyrant who hastened the dynasty's collapse. Yet other eunuchs, like Admiral Zheng He, are remembered as loyal, expanding China's prestige across oceans. Same altered body, two opposite legacies. The argument has never stopped. Here's a quirky tidbit. A few scholars once claimed eunuchs lived longer because the operation removed the strain of male hormones. Modern science even studied preserved bones of castrated men, suggesting they sometimes outlived intact peers by decades. Imagine scholars centuries later charting your bones, saying, "See, eunuchs lived longer." You'd laugh in your grave. Longer doesn't mean easier. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were essential shock absorbers in imperial systems or parasites gnawing at the state. Some point to eunuchs who stabilized courts during succession crises, others to eunuchs who drained treasuries with vanity projects. You roll your eyes at the debate because you know both are true. A eunuch is a mirror of his master, benevolent under a wise ruler, monstrous under a corrupt one. The palace breeds both outcomes. You remember specific nights that prove the scholars right and wrong at once. One winter, you stood guard outside a chamber where ministers plotted rebellion. You caught their whispers, delivered them to the emperor, and saved a dynasty from collapsing too soon. Protector. Yet another year, you accepted a bribe. Silk and gold slipped into your sleeve to delay a rival's petition. That rival was executed before his words reached the throne. Parasite. The truth is messy, and scholars prefer clean categories. Their arguments amuse you most when they assign motives. Eunuchs craved power because they lacked families, or eunuchs were loyal because they had nothing else. As if your choices can be boiled down to one missing part of your body. You want to shout across centuries, we craved power because we were human, and humans crave survival, respect, revenge, comfort, just like you. You picture a dusty conference room somewhere in the future. A professor clears his throat. Historians still debate whether eunuchs were guardians or villains. You raise your hand from the back row and say, both. Neither. Depends on the day and the emperor's mood. The scholars scribble notes, nodding seriously as if you've solved a puzzle. You smirk, knowing they'll still argue anyway. But you also recognize something tender in their debates. Even when they misjudge you, they're still trying to see you, to pull you out of shadows the chroniclers buried you in. They dust off forgotten scrolls, piece together fragments of letters, trace the faint outlines of your footsteps. They argue because they care. And for someone erased from official records, even flawed attention feels like resurrection. Humor slips in here too. Imagine a historian spending 10 years of their life writing about your laundry duties. This eunuch managed palace robes with efficiency. You'd love to haunt that scholar, tipping ink bottles over their desk just to remind them that you were more than laundry, or less, or both. One evening you sit in the palace archive staring at shelves of scrolls. You imagine future historians poring through them, lips pursed, debating whether you were hero or villain. You chuckle softly because you know the truth. No scroll will ever capture the sound of whispered jokes in the dormitory, or the smell of incense smoke clinging to your robe, or the loneliness of eating rice in silence. Those details will always slip through their fingers. You rise, brush dust from your knees, and step back into the lantern glow of the hall. Whether guardian or parasite, hero or demon, you continue to walk. Because categories belong to scholars, survival belongs to you. The arguments of scholars fade like echoes, and what remains is quieter, your own footsteps in abandoned corridors. You've walked these halls under emperors, empresses, rebels, and conquerors. Now the palace itself feels hollow. Lanterns burn dimmer, courtyards stand empty, and doors creak in the wind as if whispering to ghosts. You wander through fading echoes, listening for voices that no longer answer. The walls once thundered with gongs and trumpets. Now they groan with silence. You trail a hand along carved pillars, their lacquer flaking under your fingers. The paint is fading, the dragons dull, but you remember when they gleamed like living fire. It is a cruel trick of memory. Palaces outlive dynasties, but they never stay young. You, too, outlived many masters, but you never escaped the erosion of time. A mainstream fact. After dynasties collapsed, eunuchs often found themselves abandoned. When the Ming fell, many eunuchs were executed by rebels or forced to flee. Some became beggars outside the very walls they once commanded. Others hid in monasteries, shaving their heads, pretending they had always been monks. A few survived to see the Qing emperors move in, though by then they were too old, too brittle, too forgotten to matter. You shuffle past the dormitories where you once heard laughter and gossip. Mats lie rolled in corners, dust gathering where bodies once pressed into straw. The smell of sweat and smoke has vanished, leaving only the faint must of mildew. You pause, half expecting to hear someone snore, half expecting to hear a whispered joke. But there is only the squeak of rats in the beams. You whisper their names in your head. Brothers who sang lullabies, brothers who schemed, brothers who prayed until their knees bled. They are all gone. You remain. Here's a quirky tidbit. When archaeologists studied the Forbidden City centuries later, they discovered ovid graffiti scratched into walls by bored eunuchs, little poems, crude drawings, even tally marks of days. Imagine spending decades guarding the emperor's harem, then leaving behind nothing but a doodle of a cat chasing a mouse. That too is history, hidden in cracks, not scrolls. Historians still argue whether these remnants prove loneliness or resilience. Were they cries for help or jokes meant to outlast the empire itself? You think both. Every scratch in stone was a way of saying, I was here, don't forget me. You run your fingers over one carved mark so faint you can barely see it, and feel the weight of voices trapped in silence. The palace gardens, once perfumed with peonies and plum blossoms, have grown wild. Weeds crack through stone paths. Ponds stagnate, green with algae. You walk slowly, sandals crunching on broken tiles, remembering when these gardens shimmered with lanterns and music. Concubines once strolled here, laughing beneath willows. Eunuchs once paced these paths, watching, guarding, gossiping. Now the laughter is gone, but sometimes in the rustle of leaves you almost hear it again. At night the emptiness grows heavier. You lie awake in your chamber, the lamps long extinguished, and listen to the palace breathe. The wind moans through corridors like distant chanting. Floorboards creak as though old brothers still shuffle to duties. Sometimes you murmur back, telling stories to the darkness, as if the walls themselves deserve a bedtime tale. Humor doesn't entirely abandon you. One evening you trip over a loose tile and mutter, "Even the palace wants me gone." You chuckle softly, shaking your head. Another night, a stray cat sneaks into your chamber, curling at your feet. You whisper, "At last, a new emperor to serve," and salute the cat until it yawns and wanders away. Loneliness, after all, can't smother wit. Still, the silence presses in. You wander through the Hall of Supreme Harmony, where once you stood invisible as emperors paraded power. Dust cloaks the throne now, cobwebs dangling from its arms. You step closer, run your hand across the lacquer, and whisper, "How many bowed here? How many begged? How many died?" The throne answers with silence. You remember the day a conqueror entered these halls. Soldiers stomped through, banners unfurled, boots muddy on polished floors. Ministers trembled, eunuchs scattered. You stood very straight, bowing to a new master with the same hands you once used for the old. But now, years later, no conqueror stands here, no emperor either, only you and the faint echo of drums that will never sound again. Sometimes you wonder if this is punishment, to live long enough that silence becomes your only companion, to walk halls where even whispers have died, to carry memories too heavy for one body while no one remains to share them. Historians still argue whether eunuchs like you were villains or guardians, but none of them feel the ache of footsteps in an empty corridor. That's a truth no book can hold. I'll pause at a broken window, watching the moonlight pool on cracked stone. You remember feasts, ceremonies, rebellions, all the noise of history. Now the moonlight looks the same as it did then, indifferent, eternal. You sigh, realizing the palace has always belonged more to the moon than to any emperor, and so you keep walking, sandals scraping marble, hand brushing walls, whispering names of brothers, no scroll preserved. The echoes may fade, but your voice joins them, one more thread in the ghostly chorus. You are forgotten, yes, but in your footsteps the palace remembers. The echoes dwindle, the palace grows still. You've walked through gates of triumph, chambers of whispers, gardens of weeds, and archives of silence. Now you feel the end approaching, not the end of the palace, which will crumble slowly over centuries, but your own last sleep. Your sandals drag a little, your back bends like a bow long overdrawn, and the corridors no longer feel endless. They feel like a path winding toward a quiet door you cannot avoid. You return to your chamber, the same cloistered room where you once listened to gossip and laughter. The mats are thinner now, the wood creaks louder, dust lies thick on the beams, and a draught seeps through cracks in the window. You lie down carefully, as though every bone in your body remembers decades of bowing and kneeling. You close your eyes, and for a moment you almost hear the rustle of your brothers settling on mats around you. But when you open them again, you are alone. A mainstream fact. Records tell us that when the Qing dynasty finally modernized in the late 19th century, the last palace eunuchs lingered in Beijing until the 1920s. Photographs survive, old men in faded robes shuffling through the forbidden city with downcast eyes. They look fragile, spectral, and yet strangely dignified. Their world had vanished, but they remained, living relics of dynasties already gone. You see yourself in those images, though no camera ever captured you. Here's a quirky tidbit. One of those last eunuchs, Sun Yaoting, kept his severed parts in a small box his entire life, hoping to be buried whole. He died in 1996, long after emperors had vanished, long after the palace had become a museum. Imagine tourists shuffling past dragon thrones while the last eunuch still carried incense in his sleeve. History isn't neat, it drags its feet, like you do now. Historians still argue whether eunuchs should be pitied as victims, reviled as schemers, or remembered as essential cogs of empire. You smile faintly at the thought, because while they argue, you are simply dying. Categories no longer matter. There are no villains or heroes in the final silence, only people who walked, served, whispered, and hoped to be remembered. You lie back, staring at the ceiling beams. They're the same beams you stared at as a boy, fresh from the operation, writhing in pain. They're the same beams you stared at after your first taste of palace wine, laughing with brothers long gone. They're the same beams you stared at during nights of fear, when rebellion shook the walls and you wondered if you'd see morning. And now, they'll be the beams above your last breath. Your chest rises slowly, painfully. Each inhale feels like another bow, each exhale another whisper. You think of the crocodile dung remedies, the bland rice, the silk robes, the rituals, the gossip, the temples, the myths, the arguments, the echoes, a lifetime of contradictions stitched together into one long sigh. You wonder if anyone will speak your name when you're gone, or if the palace itself will hold the memory for you. Humor, faithful companion, nudges even now. You mutter, "At least I won't be late for duties tomorrow." The empty room offers no laughter, but you chuckle softly anyway. A joke shared with silence still counts. The lamp sputters low. You let your eyes close, drifting into the last sleep. In your dream, the palace isn't empty. Brothers shuffle beside you, concubines laugh in the distance, ministers argue over metaphors, emperors pace and cough, and incense curls upward without end. You smile in the dream, because here you are never alone, and then slowly you dissolve. Your shadow melts into marble, your whispers fade into echoes, your name slips quietly into twilight. You are gone, but not gone, woven into the palace itself. Another ghost in its endless corridors. Now the story softens, the edges blur. The palace walls fade into mist, and your footsteps slow to silence. Imagine lying back beneath tall pines, the night air cool, the stars spread wide across a sky that has outlived every dynasty. Your breath deepens, steady, calm. The sounds of ceremony and whispers fall away, leaving only the gentle rustle of leaves and the hum of the wind. The world no longer demands secrets or rituals from you. You don't have to bow or shuffle or guard doorways. You can simply rest like water settling in a quiet pond. Every echo you carried, of laughter, of gossip, of myths, of prayers, slips softly from your shoulders. They drift upward like incense smoke, fading into the night. Feel your body relax as though centuries of duty melt away. The palace gates that once loomed over you now stand open, not to trap you, but to let you pass through into peace. Beyond them, no lists wait, no punishments, no hunger, only calm, only stillness, only release. The moonlight spreads gently across stone, a cool blanket of silver. The shadows no longer frighten, they cradle you, rocking you into sleep. Each breath you take now is slower, softer, longer, until even breathing becomes optional, like drifting on clouds. You are safe. You are remembered, not in scrolls or decrees, but in the quiet imagination of those listening now. The palace may crumble, the dynasties may vanish, but your story lingers here, soft as a lullaby. Close your eyes. Let the incense curl into the stars. Let the whispers dissolve into night air. You are finished, you are free, and sleep comes easily now.